Numerous occult groups tend to see the cube as representing the final stage in the transformational process of one's being. Scottish Rite Freemasons and other Masonic extensions and offshoots use the objects of a rough stone and a cubical stone to symbolize this process. While the rough, unshaped stone represents someone who is intellectually unenlightened, morally uncultured, and uninitiated to a greater sense of truth, the perfectly shaped cubical stone represents the one who has undergone the steps to obtaining the knowledge and experience for a higher state of existence, living with a greater display of intellect, moral stamina, and spiritual power. A further look at a symbol similar in its messaging to the cubical stone is the pointed cubical stone. The stone conveys that the initiate has not only achieved what is apparently greater, but is the greatest and the final stage for spiritual transformation. This is expressed by a cube crowned with a pyramidal top, with its point symbolizing breaching into the realm of the divine. In any case, the symbolism behind the cubic stone also portrays the initiate as the cornerstone, needed for the construction of the esoteric reimagining of what is King Solomon's temple, representing not only the universe, under certain titles such as the Great Architect or the Divine Mind, but the lodge itself as if the two are spiritually interconnected. The cube has developed its reputation as the three-dimensional shape, encompassing the fullness of mystical power, and symbolizing the completion of spiritual transformation due to a concept known as the cube of space, devised by Paul Foster Case, the 20th century American occultist. In his book, The Tarot, A Key to the Wisdom of the Ages, published in 1947, Case not only applies the fundamental principles of tarot to the features of the cube's structure as a means of displaying their order of use in congruency to the cube, but also the Kabbalistic use of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and astro-alchemical signs with their appropriate zodiac directions. His blueprint for the cube's spiritual significance, being built on a foundation of quasi-mystical teaching, would later lead him to integrate it as a crucial part of the curriculum for his own occult society, the Builders of the Adytum. This composite of interlocking and overlaying elements of esoteric teaching was not only meant to convey a sense of unified practicality amongst these avenues of occultism, but also emphasizes the idea that the cube represents the structure of the universe itself. And similar to what has been presented earlier, we even see examples arguing that the cube is symbolic of the planet Saturn. One example is based on a connection of specific elements in modern tarot and Kabbalah. Another is how it can apparently be constructed out of 6 magic squares with a number arrangement that forms the magic sigil of Saturn. The other is the fact that each row and column of one side have a numerological value of 666, being the obvious indicator for a satanic implication. The spiritual capacity for transcendence associated with the cube is expressed by other developments of mystical concepts such as the characters of Metatron in Jewish mysticism and the Gnostic Logos that are both prominent in Western esotericism. And while Case's theory for the cube's spiritual symbolism has inspired modern interest for expounding on its mystery and potential by others, one speculation is that it symbolizes a distinct component of Kabbalah, specifically part of the structure of the Kabbalah's Tree of Life. But before we can address the cube's significance to Kabbalah, let's establish a basic outlook on the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. The tree, known as the Sephirot, is made up of 10 emanations or expressions, known as Sephirah, that represent the characteristics of a deity or divine source that is described as an unknown impersonal force, referred to as the Ein Sof. In Hebrew, it can be translated as either meaning the infinite or the limitless. And given that these emanations are arranged in the structure resembling a tree, with paths connecting to one another, this is meant to allegorize the spiritual journey toward the union with the divine. In Kabbalah, the path to illumination is depicted as starting at the lowest emanation, known as Malkut or kingdom, only to gradually work through different emanations of experience and knowledge until reaching the highest Sephirah, known as Keter or crown, said to contain the consciousness or full essence of the deity, only to return back to Malkut to establish a balance between these two distinctly opposite yet corresponding emanations, unifying the dual structure of this set of principles. In a detailed look at the last pathway to achieve this balance and the potential it holds, author Kevin Townley discusses this phase in his book, The Cube of Space, Container of Creation, by saying, finally, Yesod brings the world of action into the world of form. It is Yesod that sets the stage for physical manifestation in the sphere of Malkut and begins the next cycle of descent. Malkut is a good place to stop. We could theoretically take a trip to hell if we continued our descent. It is this book's intention to work on the path of return, not descent. Wait, what? Okay. Anyway, Some postulate that the cube represents the emanation of Malkut due to the similarities in their symbolism. Among each of the Sephirah, whose essence corresponds to a different celestial body in the galaxy, Malkut is said to be attributed to the Earth, since it's comprised of the 4 basic elements of fire, water, air, and earth respectively, and conveys the spiritual influence over the earthly phenomena of human labor. Even in 16th century Europe, studies in alchemy and geometry further conceptualized the idea of the cube representing the Earth. German alchemist and physician Michael Meyer expressed the spiritual potential of the Earth in his most well-known work entitled Atalanta Fusion, or Atalanta Fleeing, a compendium of emblems displaying an arrangement of alchemical imagery. One emblem of this work, emblem 36, illustrates an array of cubic stones existing in the air, land, and water. This is meant to allegorize the Earth as containing all the fundamental resources needed for the alchemist to unlock his hidden power for spiritual transformation. And to reiterate the cube's symbolism with the Earth, Italian mathematician and friar Luca Pacioli stressed the all-encompassing characteristics of its form, as one scholar notes. Finally, the cube was geometrically, symbolically, and numerically equated with the Earth, the heaviest and the most inert of the 4 elements. Friar Luca Pacioli, in the Renaissance, wrote about the cube in De Divina Proportions, explaining that since the cube represented the Earth and was the base of all dements, it was also the receptacle for receiving heavenly influence. So, at this point, we've established a prominent idea of the cube representing the spiritual ability for perfection, especially how that's expressed by the influence of one of 2 planets, one being the Earth or the other being Saturn. Though with both claims, this aspect of relating to the Earth seems to be the most commonplace, given how consistent it has been in historical dialogue. Therefore, both the divine human and the Earth-centric meanings seem to be parallel to one another, since the cube's form conveys this as the structural basis for matter and the potential for perfection due to its symmetry. And now we have the general meaning of the cube as a symbol. But there's another factor we still need to analyze, and that is, why exactly is it a black cube? Does the color itself drastically change anything we've found out so far? In order to answer that, we have to take one more look at a specific detail about the subject of alchemy. Since it describes a process of refinement likened to a metallurgic procedure, the terminology surrounding spiritual alchemy serves as an allegory for the transformation of an individual. The initiate begins his esoteric journey as if he's a primitive material, like a base metal or a stone, and is then processed to become like a pure and refined material, such as gold. This process begins by entering into what is described as being the initial or 5th stage, which is considered to be a self-destruction, blackening, or darkening known as putrefaction. This stage of alchemy is depicted with images of death and dark figures to symbolically convey how self-elimination acts as a form of renewal for the first material to unleash its inner power needed for further transformation in the so-called journey of apotheosis. The most common images would be of a skeleton standing on a coffin or a black sun, ravens or crows, and the most notable of all being the god Kronos or Saturn as Old Man Father Time holding a scythe. Another example is to note how in one emblem of Meyer's famous work, the scene plays off of aspects of Greco-Roman mythology by showing Kronos or Saturn flying over a mountainous valley, then vomiting out a rough black stone, which signifies this stage of putrefaction, rendering the prima materia, or inner essence of the stone for further refinement. Even in this emblem, the stage of putrefaction is depicted by a dead king representing the Egyptian god Osiris, who was dashed to pieces only to be reassembled and brought back to life. One scholar elaborates on Meyer's use of lead symbolism throughout his work with procedural description with some variation. Putrefaction, or decomposition, was a necessary stage in the alchemical refining process by which the stone of enlightenment was achieved. Putrefaction is the 3rd stage and involves placing the vessel in the hottest fire possible, sometimes called the mouth of hell. Oh, what do you know? More references to hell. Right, so besides that, the symbolism is described in greater detail. The purity attained in albification, which was ruled by Venus and symbolized by copper, was begun in the blackness of Saturnian putrefaction, designated by lead. Because of its base nature, Saturn marks the beginning of life's journey. Saturn, therefore, becomes the purifier, because destruction brings about a higher state of being, the death of metals in Saturnian putrefaction, followed by life in Venusian albification, refers to the king's demise and resurrection. The stone's connection with Saturn has shown to be more than just incidental, since alchemists discuss how its spiritual influence acts as a crucial device or pathway for the stone's transformation. This idea is further expressed by a 15th century alchemical emblem of a 7-pointed star, whose rays symbolize the 7 celestial bodies, with the last ray representing Saturn as it points down to the Philosopher's Stone. This close association seems to be much more impressionable on the psyche of early to modern occultists, given that some have developed highly detailed treatises of the universe's cosmology. And in the mind of German mystic and writer Rudolf Steiner, that was no exception. As the founder of the spiritualist movement known as Anthroposophy, Steiner produced voluminous writings and lectures on topics of spiritualism and phenomena relating to a sense of spiritual reality. One lecture, entitled The Earth's Passage Through Its Former Planetary Conditions, lays out the notion that the Earth's early development was responsible due to Saturn's physical progression as a planet with a race of beings of its own. By means of Saturn's primeval development, Steiner claims, if we look back through spiritual vision, we therefore find that the first foundation of man's physical body was laid upon Saturn. The whole universe, with all the beings and objects which it contained, influenced the first state of the Earth's existence. Upon Saturn, the human being existed in the form which was the first foundation of his physical body. Everything else, the blood, the tissues, etc., did not then exist. Physical apparatuses constituted the first basis of man's physical body. Even as the emerald, the mica, etc., arise through physical laws and developed in the forms of cubes, hexaders, etc., so at that time, forms developed that resembled apparatuses in which existed upon Saturn in the same way in which crystals now exist upon the Earth. The activity of Saturn's surface essentially consisted of a kind of reflection that went out into the universal space. The beings in Saturn's environment, who were scattered in the universal spaces, sent down their influences. And more current research in Saturn spiritualism is documented by occultist Arthur Moros in his book, The Cult of the Black Cube, supposedly chronicling Saturn worship and aspects of religious development. So, for the final analysis, we can say that the Black Cube is meant to be a modern rendering of the initial stage of an alchemical transmutation, as it represents destruction of old undeveloped matter to a new and perfected form of matter. Considerably, it not only hints at the destiny of the initiate, but also for the entire Earth as well. But what's counterintuitive to that messaging is how the emphasis on the destructive aspect neglects the rest of the process altogether, if not displaces it. Now, someone could make the objection that the color doesn't nullify its meaning since the cube already anticipates that intended result, therefore making it parallel to the symbol of the phoenix, for example. And that would make sense, since its original form as the Bennu in ancient Egypt symbolized dying and rising based on its connection to the gods Osiris and Ra. And of course, it would be later used as an emblematic symbol for alchemical transmutation. Now, this is based on my own opinionated take, and I might be a bit dogmatic with the principles of semiotics here, but if you consider the Black Cube as a modern alchemical symbol, with additional lore about Saturn associated with it, it still seems to put a greater emphasis on one step or stage of what is a system of signifiers that convey a process. So if it does represent spiritual perfection within destruction or by destruction alone, it does seem to contradict itself. And that's the main issue for mystics and occultists given their views on the Black Cube. Not only is their fascination with it problematic given that it actually represents the opposite of what their spiritual goal is, it also speaks the truth about what they actually believe and what will ultimately result from this process, which is really no possibility of being reborn or of recreation, just destruction. Hey, thanks for checking out this video. If you just happen to be someone interested in subjects like the one you just saw, or maybe you're someone looking for truth in a world that seems devoid of it, then I highly recommend you check out theonerds.net. It's the one source that offers great insight into the current trends and news stories of today. TheoNerds is dedicated to informing and exploring developments in gaming, pop culture, tech, and other areas with a theologically sound perspective. So go to theonerds.net, that's theonerds.net for more info.